When days turn to weeks, the reviewers return. Let's talk about 28 Days Later.
Hello everyone, welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. So, Daniel, can you please let the people know what we're going to be discussing or debating today?
So this is Have You Seen, in which we talk about a movie that some of us know well and others have just seen for the first time. Last week we talked about the zombie classic 28 Days Later. This week we are talking about the sequel from 2007, 28 Weeks Later. So just to briefly summarize the plot, at the end of 28 Days Later, the infection was coming to a close and the protagonists had survived the immediate crisis and were being rescued. And at the start of 28 Weeks Later, it is 28 weeks later, so about half a year. There's an international effort to repopulate Britain. And there's a green zone that has been cleared of zombies. And now the first people are returning to Britain into the safe zone. But the story follows a family that had been separated during the outbreak and that are now being reunited. A sequence of events leads them to discover a survivor in the infected zone that, it turns out, is an asymptomatic carrier of the rage virus, and things escalate from there. So I've seen 28 Weeks Later a whole bunch of times. Jonathan, you have, and Hervé, this might be the first time you've seen it, right?
First time and the very last time.
We'll talk about that. What was your takeaway from 28 Weeks Later, having seen it for the first time?
Positives, because there's very few. You could tell that this was an upgrade in terms of the quality-wise of the production, while still trying to recapture the elements of the digital footage and the kind of like shaky cam and the camera work that made the first one what it was. So I appreciated that. And that probably concludes our positives that I had for this movie. Outside of that, everything else was an absolute disaster in this movie. Like I was trying to be on board with it, but I just hated so much of this movie. I hated the characters in this movie. I hated the story and the plot and how it unfolded. I hated the military people that they had involved in this again. Everything was done out of convenience for moving the story forward, as opposed to how things logically would work, especially in a situation that they were in as well, which was quite infuriating to watch. Like we'll kind of get into the final deals. This is just like kind of opening thoughts in it, but nothing worked. This was a train wreck. If the first one was good, this is absolute train wreck of a movie.
Yeah, we'll get into the negatives, and I think there's quite a few, but I do actually have some positives. One of them is that it felt like you said, it's a bigger budget. It's got a whole bunch of well-known actors in it. The scale is bigger. What I do like is that the story moves forward, right? We're not seeing, aside from the opening sequence, we're not seeing the same thing again. We're seeing a time period that I think is kind of underserved in the zombie genre and that I find more interesting, which is the rebuilding, which is the crisis is over, the damage has been done, and now we're trying to move forward and rebuild in a world in which zombies are real. Although in this case, at least initially, people believe that the zombies are dead and the crisis is over, right? Related to that, we see a whole bunch of images of empty London, right? So City Airport, if you've ever been to City Airport, it's really crowded. It's really busy. It's a very small airport that basically handles like business travelers mostly. There's a lot going on, right? It's very hectic. And to see it empty is kind of cool. We're also seeing like remnants from the time of the zombie crisis, right? So like one of the tropes in zombie stories is people writing like messages on their rooftops and stuff like that, like we are alive or help, or how we saw at the end of 28 Days Later, where they formed these giant letters out of cloth so that like planes could see them. And here the roofs are being cleared of those messages because everybody has either survived or is dead, and there's nobody living there anymore. Unless it's like a whole bunch of little details where we see just shots of a post-zombie London, which I thought was cool. This concludes my positives.
Jonathan.
Wow. Goddamn. Wow. Looks like I'm on my own again for this one. I love this movie, man. I actually prefer this one in comparison to the first one. The first one was really good, don't get twisted, but the second one for me is my kind of film. Like, me and Daniel spoke briefly before about, the problems with it. And I actually did agree with most of it. However, I can bypass them because I think I just enjoyed this more. It was a very fun movie to watch. I can kind of immerse myself in the experience and in the world. I can kind of see myself in that type of world and having, well, not fun, but, you know, wanting to be in that world to survive and kind of live what they're going through. If a film can make you do that, then that's how you know it's a good film. You know, I enjoyed, especially like I enjoyed how they kind of like explored family and sacrifice. And this one felt a bit more, actually, I wouldn't say brutal, but I would say it felt a bit more bleak. I'm saying, especially with how London looked, it looked more emptier and just more, the state of it just looked more post-apocalyptic than obviously the previous film. I have more points, but I'm pretty sure we'll get into it because I'm gonna, you know, I'm just preparing myself to get into defensive mode against you two.
Hey, there's no judgment here, only poor taste. So, like, this series is meant to be about talking about what it's like when somebody watches your favorite movie for the first time, right? And so we didn't pick this movie just to dunk on it for 45 minutes. At least that wasn't my intention when I pitched it. I actually had remembered this kind of fondly. But then as I was watching it, my heart sank a little bit as I just saw all the plot holes and the unlikable characters and the nonsense of it all. And I think a lot of what it is that I watched this a few times, maybe 10 years ago. And I had not really watched it with any kind of critical eye, like actually looking at the story and seeing what works about it and what doesn't. I think I mostly remember the first 20 minutes, where we're kind of seeing like the green zone and the testing and the military people and the doctors talk about the protocols and about the plan and the rebuilding and the fact that it's like a part of the zombie story that is not the standard collapse or during or immediately after collapse kind of story. I think all of those things are things that kind of stuck in my head positively. And that is why I remembered it in a way where I said, hey, like, this is the next one. And I remember it as being pretty good. So let's watch that. And then when I watched it, I saw what a dumpster fire it was. So that was not my intention, but that's kind of what it turned out. So where do we start? Like, what exactly is wrong about this? I think the two different aspects to it is that one, it's a bad story, and two, it's a bad sequel to 28 Days Later. That's kind of my opening argument.
But I think the reason why you guys would say that it's a bad story and a bad sequel is pretty much hand in hand, as in like it's pretty much the same thing. It's because of the plot holes and the inconsistencies, especially when it comes to like the decision making that, especially that the military were making. And I understand. I'm not really gonna argue too much about that. However, I do think it was a good evolution to the first film, especially when it comes to the virus and when it comes to the environment that they were in, and when it comes to the story too. But the story is kind of the same because they like, well, I was going to say like the whole family aspect of things. There was a family in the first film when I forgot the characters' names, but you know, when they linked up with the dad and the daughter, so there was, you know, that storyline already. However, this one was just, you know, at a bigger scale. But I think for me, it was a good evolution to the second one. It was to the first one. It was an evolution that made sense, especially with, you know, the incorporation with, you know, the whole US military.
It increases the scale, right? Like we're going up a level. It's a bit like the Aliens situation, right? Where the first movie is just a couple of random people who are trying to survive this absurd or this extreme situation, and in the second one, the system is responding. But in Aliens, it was the colonial marines that were being sent by the company to clean out the colony, and here it's the military trying to take back Britain from the zombies, right? It's a similar kind of escalation. And I think on paper, that's great. I think that is actually what it should be. And having the military actually and government actually being effective in a zombie story is not overdone. Usually the deck is very carefully stacked to make them either the villains or incompetent or pointless or useless. I think that is kind of why I like the first 10 minutes as much as I do, because that's not what's happening here, right? Like, this is like a concerted effort. This is basically disaster cleanup, right? Like, this is not a war zone. This is not the collapse. This is like cleanup. And I think that certainly has potential.
Yeah. No, it does. It does. And I think with the whole incorporation with the US military, it kind of adds like that layer of socio-political commentary. It also demonstrated as well how dangerous humanity can be, even though they're living in a world filled with zombies. And that's supposed to be the main threat. But it still shows that humanity can still be the main threat.
I hear what you're saying about that, but it works better as commentary in a movie where the story makes sense and where the actions actually make sense, and the path leading to that particular moment makes sense. In this story, none of the pieces add up to get to the point where we got to, and all of the decisions, like, taking, there's an infected person on the loose. So you crowd all of the uninfected people in a cold, dark room and do what? Because, again, at the start of the movie, it's showing that they're somewhat competent, that they somewhat have a plan. You've got, snipers trained on the roof. You've got, people at their post on lookout. Yes, they might believe that the, infected have all died out, but there's still precautions in place for just in case scenario. But then in the lead up to everything going completely sort of crazy, even sort of the scene with the father being able to access the mother without anyone being around to stop him from going in that room. And even before that, it's not really explained well why he has full access to everything. Like, it's just like, oh yeah, I can pretty much go everywhere. I can't remember what you exactly said, but you said I can pretty much go everywhere. I've got access to everything, basically.
It's access all areas, level of clearance. I don't remember what exactly his job was, but running the safe zone was his job. And so he had reason to be able to go anywhere. That part's fine. What's not fine is going into a containment room, right, where there is an infected and there are no guards, or like there was maybe one guard. Why are they not treating this like an infectious disease? And why are they not set up for infectious diseases? If you go to a hospital and you like meet like somebody who's having an infectious disease, you're not up close to them. There's like a plexiglass wall between you, right? Like you cannot simply touch them. To be fair to the movie, they did not expect the idea of the asymptomatic carrier, right? They did not expect to find anybody, so they're improvising. But considering that they're improvising, why are they not especially cautious? Simply say, look, you can talk to her over the phone or whatever, but you cannot be in the same room until we know what's going on. That's one of the first big plot holes. And that also ties into, like, one of the big problems is if the point of this movie is to show the attempt to rebuild, and we are overconfident and don't respect this danger as much as we should, and as a result, it blows up in our face. If that is the case, shouldn't the movie show us kind of why they're doing what they're doing, and then we watch it be not enough? Right? It's like kind of in Jurassic Park, right? We are there to see the dinosaurs escape from their enclosures. So we know from the start that this is going to happen, but we spent like half an hour being shown all the precautions that the park had to prevent this from happening. And then they show us like a sequence of events that explains to us why the precautions don't work. And here it just all falls apart immediately. It's like a house of cards made from wet cardboard. Like, it just collapses at the first problem.
And just to add to it as well, what was really frustrating about watching it all fall apart was the fact that these are, again, trained soldiers. When it's just one person infected, we've kind of seen how you can actually deal with infected people with, simple things like crowbars or, machetes and stuff like that. These people have like weapons and guns and stuff like that. So how do you allow one person to then infect one soldier after another soldier? Like, a competent soldier could probably deal with about 4 or 5 infected people before they face any problem. Because once you see them running at you, you've let off a few shots and it's over with. It just didn't add to the believability of what was going on.
In the first movie, Frank did this. When we first meet Frank, he's wearing police riot gear, like with the face visor, so that the zombies can't bite him and they can't spit blood at him. And he's got the big shield and he's got the truncheon. And those are all effective against infected. Here, the military 6 months later has no adapted tactics. We're not seeing any kind of anti-zombie measures or anti-infected measures. And it's trivially easy. You can come up with protocols like lots of doors that self-lock and you need a certain amount of dexterity to open them. But like a raged zombie can't open them. Or long corridors where they have to charge like 20 meters and you can just gun them down. Or everybody has like panic rooms where everybody goes to the nearest panic room when there's an alert and everybody hunkers down while the military cleans up the infected. You know what I mean? Like, you can come up with so many protocols and you can say, well, they don't really expect any of them to really show up, or they haven't really like when you follow like how wars unfold, a lot of the time it's a complete mess at the start, and then relatively quickly people learn what works and what doesn't in that particular environment, and then tactics change and weapons change and how people fight changes. But here they're meant to be kind of in control and have learned their lessons and have adapted, but they are not using any appropriate tactics at all. It's just the snipers are kind of the part that makes the most sense. But when the train kind of pulls into the Isle of Dogs, there's just like a machine gun nest. But how is that a defense against infected, for example? Normally, I kind of praise the 28 days later for its good world building, because we are kind of seeing kind of how people adapt and use the tools that they have and stuff like that. And there's like background elements that kind of tell a little story about what happened here and stuff like this. And here it's kind of the exact opposite. Here it's completely missing. Here the world has not adapted to this threat. And that is the only threat. There are no raiders, there are no looters, there's no other army that you have to defend against. Your only enemy is the infected. And you have not adapted your tactics to that.
Could argue and say that they have adapted, because London didn't have any zombies outside beyond their zone. Well, I don't know what terms refer to where they were staying at, but beyond where they were staying at, there was no zombies there, and there was no zombies where they were staying there too. So that is the evolution in, from what London was 28 weeks prior to that.
But it's about what weapons they are using to fight the infected.
One thing I will agree is I will definitely say that was lazy writing. However, can we act like, why are we acting like accidents can't happen in like a secured environment? Like I was gonna use Area 51, but Area 51 we haven't seen no leaks from coming out from there. But still, there's been like secured places where an accident will happen. We're like, how the hell did that happen there?
Accidents can happen, but the way that it's portrayed in this movie, it just doesn't make sense. Like, there's examples in other movies where disasters happen, like Daniel mentioned. You're seeing how the failings come about. You're seeing how there was like oversight here or there. Here, it's just everyone's completely incompetent because the movie needs people to be incompetent so that they can have enough zombies to run around and gun down in the third act of the movie. There's literally no other plausible reason the movie gives as to why everything goes awry. And it's the movie's job to tell the audience. It's the movie's job to inform the audience of why this happened, because everything's secure. Everything's been handled. We're trying to rebuild. We're trying to sort of head in the right direction. It's literally the movie's main purpose is to show how even once we feel like we're in control, we can lose control over everything, pretty much.
And there are several examples of zombie stories where people adapt their tactics. So there's a Walking Dead spinoff. I forget which one it is. I watched like 2 episodes of it because another one, there's like 5 at least. So there's one where a bunch of teenagers basically go out on a quest.
That one, I need to finish it. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I have to look up the name, but I watched like the first 2 episodes because like the teenage characters were just so insufferable. But the first 2 episodes actually had some decent world building in it because it showed a community that had adapted to zombies existing. So as an example, all the doors lock from the outside, because in the Walking Dead universe, if somebody dies, they turn into a zombie. And so if somebody dies in their sleep, the room becomes a trap because they cannot open the door from the inside. And that happens in the first plot. Like there's like a psychiatrist and that person has a heart attack and becomes a zombie, but they are contained to their apartment because of how the building is designed. So that is basically adapting to a world in which this is a threat and you have to prevent it from happening. Another example is in the World War Z book, not the movie, which is an abomination, but the book. The final part of the book, it concerns taking the fight to the zombies. The book outlines in detail what kinds of tactics they use, because it's basically about a war of attrition against these shambling zombies. And they use very specific weapons to kind of make killing as resource efficient as possible, because that's the only way you can survive against the zombies. And there was another one in later Walking Dead where people wear like these stormtrooper uniforms and their necks are shielded because they have to defend against bites, for example. So there's like a whole bunch of different examples of how you can show that people are adapting to zombies being a threat. And this is just missing here. And if the point of the story is that we are just arrogant and we're not taking the threat seriously, then like you can show like the military not having adapted, but it doesn't feel like the movie made that point. It felt like, at least when I was watching it, the collapse, like the failure felt completely unearned and unsatisfying because we are not seeing what they're doing and why exactly, where either they make a good attempt and there's a good reason for the attempt to contain the zombies to fail, or we are seeing why they are so arrogant and overconfident, and then we see how that predictably blows up in their face. It just simply collapses the entire thing simply collapses for apparently no good reason from one moment to the next. I don't know, maybe there's an interpretation of this movie where that is the point, But I just did not get that from the movie. And if that was the point, then that should have been a stronger theme in how like the military and the doctors and the politicians interact with each other and what they believe about the threat and stuff like this. It comes down to simply, okay, what do you do when against all expectations, there's this carrier that you have to manage? Like, how can you just put them in a room? I think that's really the problem. And as a result, when then the big chaos breaks out and characters are on the run and the infection is spreading again, I kind of just shrug, because it does not feel like a satisfying payoff to something that's been set up earlier. It doesn't feel intentional. It just feels like they're just doing stuff. And that is really kind of the underpinning frustration I have with this movie, is that it does not feel like a point is being made.
I think it was just they were just trying to show, well, it wasn't trying to, I think it was just human error. And I think the whole, like, the way that the collapse happened so quickly, I think I don't know if this was intentional, but how I saw it was kind of parallel to the spread of the virus, how quick and how crazy it can get, you know what I'm saying, how quickly it can spread as well. So the way that kind of like that one human error caused a whole collapse in like, I don't know how many minutes, maybe even an hour. But that for me, I was like, okay, that's kind of like similar to, you know, how erratic the zombies, like in their behavior, how erratic the zombies are in the world that we're living in. So the erraticness and the quickness of the collapse within the community that we're in was it kind of did add to the world building of the world that they were living in, because it adds to the whole erratic behavior of the whole film. And that's kind of like the tone of the film is erratic, fast, chaos. That's
highlighted in the first movie in terms of, you know, there's this infection that gets out and then everything goes to shit pretty much. And that's the kind of like bread and butter of the opening of a first zombie movie. We don't need to see that again in the second movie. And to kind of go back to,
but we didn't really though. With the first movie, we were already in a world with zombies, whereas this one, it was like there wasn't really. Well, in the first 10 minutes, yeah, there were zombies, but when they moved to London, in that world, it was like, okay, there's no zombies, but it showed how a human error can kind of like, it went from 0 to 100 from a human error and from not being careful. And that's kind of like, you have to be careful in that world that you're living in. And it shows that when you're not careful, that's what happens. You know what I'm saying? How quick, you know, danger can come at your front doorstep if you're not careful in that sort of world.
In the second movie, the virus is a known quantity, right? Where they know that first of all, that the infection exists. They know how it's transmitted. They know how dangerous it is. And they take no real countermeasures is the problem. In the first movie, nobody knew what was going on, and because it spreads so quickly, that's why it turns into this big crisis and everything collapses so completely. And now
they're referring to the government. When you say they, are you referring to the government? You're referring to like everyone in this. Okay,
kind of everybody. Yeah.
But that's what I was gonna say, because the government, they don't count everyone. That's how like society is right now. Really, even though I remember you're making about the point in Australia where you're saying like the people in Australia, they know what they're doing, right? So I'm pretty.
So we were making that point about how dangerous animals like crocodiles are only dangerous to tourists and drunk people in Australia. Like Australia is known for all these dangerous animals and this bizarre fauna where everything is out to poison you. And that is really only a problem if you don't know what the dangers are.
Yeah. And my point was pretty much, these are like all foreigners in a new land. Even like, I'm sure these are people from all over the world. So it's like, in terms, I can kind of see how the people wouldn't know what to do, because the government's pretty much in control of everything.
You're making excuses,
but I do agree,
because if you're going into an active zone where there's infected people, the bare minimum you're going to get is a brief of what you're dealing with. So this excuse of like they didn't know what was going on just doesn't make sense, because this is military people. They're tasked with handling the situation. They're tasked with knowing what to look out for and knowing how to deal with the threat that they're facing. Part of it should also be how to contain it if anything like breaks out. Like, these are all, again, we don't see it in the movie, but these are all like basic briefing things that you would expect military people to have if they're stepping in, especially if they're stepping into something that's so foreign to them, because these are used to just kind of being in a war zone, shooting at each other, shooting at some other human beings. I think they even like kind of make a joke about it in the movie or something along the lines. Being in this situation, saying that they're foreigners and stuff like that, it just doesn't fly. You're like making excuses for the movie.
The soldiers are, but the people who are coming back, who are being settled, are Londoners, are British people who had been fled Britain. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. I don't think you'd want to move to London after a zombie crisis. It's not the time for tourism.
But with the US military, doesn't that show that, okay, these people might be from all over the world?
The military, yes. But the people who are being settled, no. The people who are moving into London, they are refugees returning home. And also just on the topic of like, would the government come up with effective plans and whatever? We did this 5 years ago in COVID. Like there was a threat, a real threat, and we needed to adjust our behavior to contain the spread as much as possible and so on, right? And the governments came up with protocols. You know, in hindsight, you can argue which of these should have been more or less or quicker or whatever, or which were effective and which weren't. But the point is, an attempt was made to come up with effective and simple rules for behavior to manage this crisis. So this idea that in a zombie apocalypse, the government would just shrug and just be a bunch of jocks with guns is just nonsense. Like they might even come up with overly restrictive rules just to be safe or whatever the case might be, but they would absolutely, like children would drill on what to do. Like there would be duck and cover kind of drills for what happens when the zombies come back and stuff like this, right? Like schools would do this and so on.
They certainly wouldn't let two kids wander out of the quarantine zone into the infected area and just go on a bike ride to their family home to somehow magically discover that their mother survived. And we'll kind of get to how she survived, because she should have been dead from the opening of the movie. Discover her, and then bring her back
in those 6 months.
What did she eat? How did she survive in the house? Because yes, she's immune, but these are like raging zombies. They would have like killed her with all of this on the violence, but somehow she magically ran away and then found her way back to her family home for whatever reason. Again, it's just like you're adding up too many conveniences in your story that leads to something that's not satisfying at all. And one thing I wanted to like kind of mention, this kind of like bring the conversation back a little bit, was what was the actual point of the movie? Because it felt like all the elements of it were very dissatisfying, wasn't developed at all. You know, you got the whole like family element. You had the father that supposedly like ran away from his dying wife to save himself. You've got the kids coming back to sort of the environment with their father and sort of the sibling relationship and stuff like that. But none of the family elements is really delved into that well, or sort of handled with any type of care at all. And then you have the element of the person that is immune to the virus. And again, they don't really take it anywhere with it, as opposed to just a plot device for the infected to spread because her husband, hasn't seen his wife in so long and then wanted to kiss her, even though he probably would have known that she was sort of contagious, which again didn't make sense. And then you then have sort of the whole military aspect of it, and you have this whole rebuild that we've been talking about. What's the point? Like, what are the themes and what are you trying to tell in the story? What's actually going on, or is it that you just kind of cobbled up a few pieces of things that you thought fit into this type of story and then just put it in there without really any thought on how you would flesh it out, how you would develop it to actually tell a good human story? And I feel like the first movie kind of stumbled into some level of good storytelling, some level of good characters in there with some some nice development. And here, it's just nowhere to be seen anywhere.
I have to disagree with that. One of the main points was that to show that there's immune amongst the people.
I mean, that's kind of part and part in zombie movies. You might have like the odd immune person in there, but what purpose does it serve in the story? So like in The Last of Us, for example, you have that situation where what's the right thing to do with someone that's immune? Do you let this person die so that you can come up with a cure to save humanity? Or have you built a bond with this person over the course of your journey that you're not willing to let this person go? There's this dilemma and this conflict that's raised from it. In this movie, she's kind of immune for immune's sake. They're, thinking about researching and looking into it. And even then, I think the military just wanted to kill her because she was an infected person and wasn't really jiving with the research that they were trying to do. But she was just immune for immune's sake. And to say that it was like genetic and it might be passed down to one of her kids pretty much. And it's like, okay, we're not doing anything interesting with this at all. So it's like, okay, what's the point?
I think it was near probably the beginning of the third act or near the end of the second act, where the doctor was having a conversation with the military guy, the sniper, where she said a line where she said, we have to protect these kids over our lives, over my life, and even over your lives. I think that's kind of the main reason of this film. It was to kind of show, was three reasons actually, was to show that there's more ways that the infection can spread rather than just a bite. Shows also obviously the immune, and it builds off the foundation of 28 Days Later because it creates an evolution in those 2 points, and those 2 points kind of create that vehicle and that kind of opening for 28 Years Later in terms of what you think is going to be about, which is okay to create that antivirus against the zombies. I'm saying, so their existence, the kids' existence, and the whole, being immune was the reason for 28 weeks later.
Okay, 28 years later is way too late for the. Well, it's not too late, but I mean, we're kind of pushing the time frame or whatever. Again, if you're going to introduce it to this story, it has to serve the story that you're telling it in. You can't be, just. Again, there's no harm in setting up sort of threads that will then tie into future movies, but I don't think that's the purpose. That was the purpose of it, because again, we're getting 28 years later. Oh, how many years? Like almost 20 years later from when this movie was made. So I don't think that they put that piece of information in there to serve the next movie. For it to be like a main component of like this movie, it has to serve some type of story narrative.
There was supposed to be another sequel that got trapped in development hell for several years and was then cancelled. So 28 years later was not the original plan. There was meant to be another chapter, and I don't know what was supposed to happen in it, if that's even known. I can actually come up with something where the idea of the asymptomatic carrier is actually a good idea, and that is that in the first movie, we are going on the assumption that this is a temporary crisis, right? That the zombies will eventually die off, and then it's over, and then we can move on. And the existence of the asymptomatic carriers means we can never move on. This will always be around, and we have to adapt to a world in which this just crops up. Or we put the carriers in camps or kill them all. Those are our choices. And that is a very different situation and very different calculation than, we just have to tough it out for a couple of weeks and then it's over. And I think that is potentially interesting. Problem is, this movie doesn't do this. There's no moment of realization where there's a bunch of people in a meeting, a bunch of scientists and soldiers and politicians, and they are being briefed on this, and they realize, like, this is never going to end. We are never going back to normal.
That's their first encounter with, obviously, her species. Well, she's human, but you get what I'm trying to say.
I'm just saying that's what the movie could have been about. That's how you make that interesting.
I do hear what you're saying, and I do actually, by the way, I do agree that, that would have been a good idea to incorporate. However, in defense of them, that was their first that's their first interaction with her kind. So it's like, okay, that could have been the opening for the next movie that they create. I do hear where Hervey's coming from as well in terms of like 28 years later. I don't think that was, the initial plan, because obviously one of the reasons why that's just too far away, etc., etc. I do hear that. However, if obviously Dan, you said they were going to make another movie, your idea could have been in that film that you said that they were going to do.
It speaks to this idea that, like, what's the theme of this movie? Like, what is it about?
So with that's kind of just like a device in the story, but as a story and as building characters, building some of the conflicts between characters, building some type of theme within that, it doesn't serve anything.
It does though, because we saw what happens when they're trying to protect those two kids. It led to a lot of death.
Because they made the military stupid. They just decided that the military would be the bad guys. And at a particular moment, okay, once we get to the point where there's a bunch of infected running around the street and there's a bunch of sort of people as well, and the situation's gotten to a point, forget how we got there, but we got to a point where everything's, looking like it might potentially turn to shit again. I can understand you wanting to, just shoot everyone and, just sort of shoot with no hesitation. But then there's so many points, especially when they're trying to get the sort of small group of people to safety. You have one of the military guys leading sort of the civilians through the streets, and one of the other military guys doesn't have the discernment to say, oh, maybe these guys aren't infected and maybe we can sort of actually help them. No, he just shoots. They just start shooting at the kids for whatever reason. I have no clue. You have people driving cars in this. It's like the zombies can't drive, but you're shooting at the car. For what reason? I have no clue. It's not made clear why all of a sudden you had to kill everyone. Like in the moment where the zombies are loose, yeah, okay, we just want to sort of contain it. People are going to get bit and they're going to turn to zombies. We just need to contain it as fast as possible. Just kill everyone. It's okay. But in a moment where there are no zombies around and it's just humans and there is no threat, take a moment and be like, oh, hey, like, what's going on? And you'd be like, oh, okay, we're just survivors. We're just trying to get off the streets. Because the military weren't shown to be bad guys in this. They weren't shown to have no seedy plan or shown to be, evil in any type of way, shape or form. So it doesn't make sense why you're shooting at people that way to smoke. I don't know, man. The movie just didn't make sense. And then the way that Jeremy Renner's character died when he's trying to push the car and he's just set on fire, it's just like, okay, whatever, man. This movie's just doing stuff to make things dramatic.
I'm not gonna argue with how they tried to control the outbreak, because that was something which I saw. I was like, okay, I have an issue with this. Especially with when they introduced the whole smoke thing. I don't know what the hell that was, but even Daniel mentioned it. That's where I got it from. But when they threw the smoke in the city, and then obviously that pretty much smoked out the zombies, they could have handled it in that way. Beforehand, they could have taught the people, okay, so if there is an outbreak, then what we're gonna do is smoke up the area, and then everyone cover your mouths. Obviously, I'm pretty sure the zombies weren't covering their mouths, so that could be a resolution. Everyone cover your mouths, and
That
then we're gonna
wasn't
pretty much weed out all the zombies.
their plan. Wasn't for the humans to be on the streets. Their plan was for the humans to be in this dark room in this facility as a zombie food. Pretty much, that was the extent of the military plan. So,
Also, just to illustrate just how stupid this is, I just had an idea for a protocol. It's 100% effective. You drill everybody to raise their hands in a crisis, and anybody who's not raising their hand is a zombie, and you shoot them.
simple.
True.
Right?
That's very true. While they're running away, they could do that as well. Very
You
true.
know what I mean? Like if it's about how do we keep this from spreading? Like, yes, run away, yes, go to cover, yes, go to safety, but like come up with some kind of signal saying, I like have the humans do something that the infected will not do. And then the snipers can determine exactly who's infected and who isn't, for example. Right? That just popped into my head apropos of nothing, but it's like that is how flimsy this is. And it's not simply the military makes mistakes. There is nothing at all. We've bitten that particular horse to death, and now it's coming back and trying to bite us. One more?
I was just saying, I had one more. Was the guy in the helicopter, my man from
oh yeah, you pissed me off. I can't lie. I love the guy, but
again,
you pissed me off.
Again, you have people who are clearly humans trying to get on a helicopter. What is the reason why you would be so against it? That it just didn't make sense. There was no justification for why the military just kind of went crazy on all the humans. It just didn't make sense. So like him flying the helicopter to try and throw the guy off of the helicopter, it's like, when did like the military turn into monsters?
At that point, the order had been given to kill everybody.
Yeah.
But if there's ever an illegal order, it's this. Right? Like if I'm the helicopter pilot, I take on the civilians, and then I make my case in the court-martial, and then make the military argue I should have killed them, and then see how that goes for them.
True. But I was going to say also, to be fair, even in fictional movies, but like in realistic fictional movies, like for example, whenever there's like a rescue mission, like for example in Blood Diamond, where the military, they were on a rescue mission for pretty much the Americans and people from their country. But the rescue mission, they were pleading for them to get over the Africans, the Congolese people that were obviously being hunted down by the rebels. But obviously that wasn't their mission. So at first they were proper against it, but they ended up saving them. But they had to go against protocol. They had to go against the law of authority. So I think in that scene there with the black guy, even though he did piss me off, I think that's still kind of realistic in a way, because he has to follow his orders.
Okay, what also annoys me about that is that in this world, you've set up that when people are bitten by zombies, they turn into zombies pretty instantaneously. So
you need a 30-second quarantine that does it.
And that's it.
Because
like you say, as a helicopter guy, you say you stand there for 30 seconds. If you don't turn into zombies, you can get on the helicopter. And that's pretty much it. As opposed to just being against all humans for the sake of being against all humans. So again, this is why this movie annoys me, is because you're not doing this because it makes sense logically with anything that you've set up in this world. You're doing it because you need tension and you need drama, and it just doesn't work.
All right, so we've beaten this to death, and it's come back to life, and we killed it again. I think the really big problem here is that this is just thematically empty, right? This is about nothing. It's just a sequence of events that feels a bit like a zombie movie. It does drive the plot forward, but in the worst way, which is you have this unique setup where the infection is contained to Britain. It has been apparently contained in all the other places where infected got out, right? Like in the original movie talks about confirmed cases in Paris and in New York, and clearly those places have not fallen. And so it's been contained to Britain. You're throwing that away in the last minute, where now the infected are spreading out to Paris. And in 28 years later, it sure seems like the entire world turned into a fairly generic zombie apocalypse, right? Where like society is like unrecognizable and is basically reduced to small pockets of survivors again. Not only is your movie not about anything, but you're throwing away your unique selling points, which is the zombies are not taking over and it's contained to a particular location. And that is all undone by the end of it. And it's not in service of something more interesting. It's not going to interesting places is my problem.
What if the zombies were still active in the UK and the rest of the world used it to dump all their criminals in that place. Just something different.
Yeah.
I don't know. Probably not even a good idea.
There's Train to Busan, which is a Korean zombie movie, which is essentially about people evacuating on a train. And then there's a sequel to that where the Korean, I've forgotten what it's called now, but the plot of that is that the Korean peninsula has been evacuated because the zombies have taken over. And there's like refugees all across like Southeast Asia. And the plot is about a bunch of criminals going back into Korea, into zombie-infested Korea, to retrieve like valuable stuff. I think it's money. Like there's just money lying around. Banks are full of money and stuff like this, right? It's a little bit like, this is similar to that Zack Snyder movie about zombies in Las Vegas, right? So there would be reasons to go back into an infected Britain, right? Because there's still valuable stuff there. All right, any last thoughts on 28 Weeks Later?
Hard skip. Hard skip. Nothing enjoyable about this movie whatsoever. Barely touching the characters. Characters were so annoying, so generic, had really nothing about them whatsoever. This type of character we need, and you just kind of like throw them in there and whatever. You need the sort of defector from the army who sort of comes to save the day and whatever. It was just a bunch of nonsense, to be honest. No real rhyme or reason to anything that was going on in this movie whatsoever. It's not even entertaining in any type of way. There's no real zombie action that I thought was interesting or entertaining. No real character moments that I thought were really well developed or had any emotional weight to it or anything. And it was just one big waste of time. So sorry to be harsh to this movie, but after 28 days, I really had some decent expectations for this. I wouldn't say it's tanked my expectations for 28 years later because I think it's, far enough removed and it probably won't be the same people making it. So it hasn't tanked my expectations for that. But it's kind of handicapped that movie in terms of what it could have been and how it could have differentiated from what other zombie movies were. So
for me, like I said, I really like this one. I think this is a film that I've rewatched a couple of times. For me, it's just fun, man. It's definitely a fun movie. I definitely do agree with how they've kind of like expanded the story. I enjoyed kind of like the main point of it, even though it is something which we've seen in other movies. I will agree and say that it is pretty much a generic idea. However, I just think just everything around the idea and the way that it's just action packed and it's fun. It did have its plot holes, I will agree, and the decision making was questionable, I will agree. However, all in all, I think I could see what they were trying to do, and they just made it fun. It was a fun experience, and like I said, it was a world which I liked seeing because it was London, and seeing London in that, because I don't think we have much. I don't think like London films. I don't think there's much like zombie apocalypse movies. There's mostly associated with Americans. So kind of like seeing it in the world that they were in, like in the environment that they were in, which was an environment close to me. That's what made it even more better. And just it was just a fun movie, man. So I would actually recommend this film.
Yeah, not much to add on my end. It's just it had a bunch of potential to go interesting places and it didn't. The action is okay. It's not that great, and for that reason, it's just underwhelming and frustrating. And there's way too many plot holes in this. Like there's a fine line between a plot hole and just characters making a mistake, especially in a dangerous situation. But here, it's not justified by the characters or by the emotional state or by the circumstances under which people act. The entire plot is just contrived from start to finish, and it barely has any interesting ideas, and the few it has, it doesn't develop. So yeah, that's I think that is why this movie is so frustrating, because it built on such a strong foundation, and then it squandered a whole bunch of potential for no good reason at all, and seemingly just because the filmmakers didn't have better ideas. Like, this is a completely unforced error, in my opinion. Like, I don't see anything where it had to be this way, or where they, were too ambitious, or they had an idea that could not be realized in 2007, or whatever it might be, right? Like, there's movies that don't work because the creators are dreaming too big, or something like that, right? And this is not happening here. Here, they are wide awake.
All right, guys. Well, thank you very much for tuning into today's debate.
If you made it this far into the episode, thank you very much for rocking with us. Of course, if you liked everything that you heard during this episode, you should probably tell a friend. And if you hated everything and you thought we were chatting a bunch of nonsense and you thought this was the greatest movie of all time, tell an enemy. We are the Eye of the Storm podcast.
All right, guys, you heard it here first. We'll see you next week. Au revoir.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.